Have you ever seen a massive, powerful protest movement demanding real, fundamental change, only to watch the official response kind of fizzle out into a corporate logo update or a new street mural? It's a frustratingly common story. Well, today, we're going to unpack the core ideas from Olúfemi O Táíwò's book, Elite Capture, to get a framework for understanding exactly why that happens and what it tells us about how power really works in our world. Okay, so here's our roadmap. First up, we're going to look at the paradox of the 2020 protests to really set the stage. Then we'll define the theory of elite capture itself. From there, we'll get into how elites actually shape our shared reality, which is fascinating stuff. Then we'll examine the dangers of a well-meaning strategy called deference. And finally, we'll see what the book offers as a more powerful alternative. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, A Paradox of Protest. So the book starts with this puzzle that, a lot of us saw with our own eyes. How can so much righteous, radical energy from the streets end up resulting in what often feels like, well, just symbolic gestures from the people in charge? I mean, we really have to remember the massive scale of 2020. This was a truly global uprising against police violence. In the U.S. alone, something like 26 million people hit the streets after the murder of George Floyd. But it wasn't just in the U.S., not by a long shot. As you can see here, it was happening in Kenya, Nigeria, Brazil, all over. Táíwò's point is that these weren't just separate events. They were all different fronts in the exact same global fight against repressive systems. And this slide just lays out the disconnect so perfectly. On one side, you have these crystal clear demands coming from the protesters, real systemic change, taking apart repressive institutions, actually redistributing resources. And then look at the other side. The responses from the centers of power, painting Black Lives Matter on a street, new corporate diversity workshops, and even the CIA was putting out recruitment ads using the language of social justice. So something was clearly getting lost in translation between the demand and the response. Which, of course, brings us to the central question of this whole explainer and the book itself. Why? Why does this happen? Why does all of this incredible, powerful, mass energy so often get diverted into symbolic gestures instead of the deep structural change that people are literally fighting and dying for? And that brings us to Section 2, the theory of elite capture. This is where the book gives us a name and a history for the force that pulls these powerful political movements off course. Okay, let's really break down this core concept. Elite capture, it's a process where socially advantaged people, the elites, get control of a project, like a social movement, and then steer it toward their own, often narrower interests. Now, this is really important. This doesn't mean it's some kind of secret conspiracy cooked up in a back room. Táíwò describes it as more of a predictable side effect of living in an unequal world. It's just a pattern that tends to happen when some people have way more power, money, and influence than everybody else. And this idea, it isn't new. It has deep roots. Way back in 1957, the sociologist E. Franklin Fraser wrote this really controversial book, Black Bourgeoisie. In it, he argued that the Black middle class sometimes chased goals that really only benefited their own slice of the community. For example, they might celebrate the symbolic win of a Black doctor becoming president of some medical association, even while that same association was lobbying against national health care, a policy that would have materially helped the vast majority of the Black community. And we see this pattern play out on a global scale. Around the same time, the political philosopher Frantz Fanon was watching all these post-colonial independence movements. And he warned that if the new, empowered national elites just took the place of the old colonial rulers without fundamentally changing the system itself, the promise of liberation would become, as he put it, just an empty shell, a fragile imitation of the real thing. But hold on a second. A really common argument you hear today is that the real problem is identity politics, right? That it's just naturally divisive and always leads to these symbolic dead ends. Well, the book tackles this argument head on by going right back to the source. And this slide is so important because it clears things up. The term identity politics was actually created in 1977 by the Combahee River Collective, a group of Black, queer, feminist socialists. And for them, it was the exact opposite of divisive. It was a way to create political priorities based on their full lives, refusing to be split up by different movements. It was meant to be an entry point for building coalitions. As one of the founders, Barbara Smith, says, how the term is used today is very different than what we intended. So the book's argument isn't that identity politics is the problem. It's that identity politics has been captured. So let's move on to Section 3 and see how this all works. How elites shape reality. This is where we get into the deep mechanics of power, the invisible architecture that's all around us. To explain this, Táíwò uses that classic fable of the emperor's new clothes.
Now, the key insight from that story isn't really about what the townspeople genuinely believe in their hearts. The point is about how the power structure, the fear of being called stupid by the emperor, forces them all to act as if they believe he's wearing beautiful clothes. Power organizes our behavior, sometimes without even touching our private beliefs. This behavior works because of a concept the book calls common ground. Now, hang with me here. Just think of it like the shared set of rules and assumptions that we all agree on just to have a conversation. If we're talking about a football game, the common ground is that we all accept the rules of football, right? It's the script for our social reality. But, and this is the absolute key, the power to write that script, to decide what the rules are, is not shared equally at all.
And this slide uses a really stark example to show you just how unequal it is. In a master-slave relationship, the master's power just unilaterally defines reality. If the master says it's not raining, then for the purposes of their conversation, it's not raining. The slave's actual lived experience of getting wet just isn't allowed to contribute to their shared understanding. The common ground has been completely captured. This power also reshapes our personal values through a process called value capture. So here's how that works. Let's say you start with a complex value, like wanting to be a good, helpful driver. But then you enter a system, like a ride-sharing app, that only rewards a super simplified version of that, a 5-star rating. Before you know it, your goal shifts from being a good driver to just getting the 5-star rating. The system has captured your rich value and replaced it with its own simple metric. It's why we start chasing social media likes instead of real connection. We end up adopting the system's values because that's what gets rewarded. And this is not just some new tech-era thing. The historian Carter G. Woodson was making this exact same point all the way back in 1933. He argued that the American education system was a perfect example of value capture, that it was designed not for the liberation of Black people, but to teach them to conform to the needs of the existing power structure. Okay, section 4, the dangers of deference. Now we get to a really provocative part of the argument. It's about how a political practice that seems ethical and right on the surface can actually unintentionally make the problem of elite capture even worse. This practice is what Táíwò calls deference politics. You've probably seen this in action. It's an approach to justice that focuses on interpersonal etiquette inside a specific space, like a meeting or a classroom or an activist group. The idea is to pass the mic or give conversational authority to people who are seen as being more marginalized within that particular room. But that leads to the single most important question you can ask about this whole approach. Who gets to be in the room in the first place? Because, as this slide shows, getting into these influential rooms is not a random draw. It's the final stage of a huge social filtering system. Immigration policies often filter for people who are already advantaged. Your class background determines your access to networks. Elite universities act as powerful pipelines into jobs of influence. By the time someone gets a seat at the table in media or politics or academia, they are, almost by definition, not representative of the most marginalized people. They're the ones who successfully made it through all the filters.
So here's the problem in a nutshell. Deference politics spends all its time and energy trying to regulate the flow of conversation inside the room. It basically accepts the room itself, its walls, and its locked door as a given. It doesn't question the architecture of the room, and more importantly, it doesn't question why so many people are locked outside of it entirely. And this brings us to our final section, Section 5, Building a Better World. The book doesn't just critique the problem, it actually proposes a practical alternative to just getting better at navigating the rooms that power has already built for us. And that alternative is called constructive politics. It's an approach that is laser-focused on outcomes, not just on process or social etiquette. Its main concern is with building new things, new institutions, new systems, and achieving specific material goals that actually redistribute social resources and power. We're talking about things like housing, healthcare, and real political control. This table just lays out the contrast so clearly. Deference politics focuses on interpersonal dynamics. Its goal is often to avoid personal complicity, to feel righteous, and its guiding question is, am I saying the right thing? Constructive politics, on the other hand, is focused on material goals. Its goal is to actually build power and get results, and its guiding question is totally different. Are we winning? The metaphor shifts from just regulating traffic inside the old room to building a brand new house. And this final slide really captures the central choice that the book leaves us with. It's a powerful question to apply to our own political lives. Whether we're seasoned activists or just trying to be engaged citizens, Is our focus on getting better at navigating the rooms that already exist, or is it on taking up the much harder but much more important task of actually building the world we want?